So I've actually said names. We've got Dr. Marianne Ramsky, Dr. Marianne Bromsky, Dr. Aaron Rule, and Dr. Dominic Parat here. And let me pick up with that question, Marianne, talking about the Senate Research Committee, and ask sort of all three of you, if you know, is there thought in the VPR's office about ways to address this? I realize he's new. Um, so if people have concerns, is the Senate Research Committee the best place to bring those concerns, or would you recommend, who else should people talk to?
So I haven't heard. Tim Denning was on the WebEx with us, and he really listened, but he did not make any comments. And I haven't heard of anything that's being done specifically related to human subjects. But I would think if there are concerns that are coming up, that the Senate Research Committee is a place to at least get the conversation started, because Tim is paying a lot of attention to he's taking the committee's guidance, and he's asking us a lot of questions related to a range of issues. So it seems like a place to start, because at least will generate discussion. And interestingly, the committee is really pretty balanced. It's not all natural computational sciences. There's a good bit, there are a number of humanities and social behavioral faculty on the committee.
That's good. I know the nominations committee thinks about that each year and putting people on the different, on the research committee and several others. So let me sort of kick off with a general question, and Dom, maybe I'll start with you and then go to Aaron and to Marianne, which is just, could you talk briefly, how has your research been impacted by COVID? And it would be helpful to avoid expletives and avoid, but maybe just to document specifics.
You said avoid expletives. You didn't prohibit me from using them.
I would never presume to tell senior faculty.
So in my case, all human subjects, all in-person human subjects research is totally suspended, and has been since mid-March. And a lot of that's due to just the complicated nature of doing human subjects research, just any form in person during COVID. For my lab in particular, because we administer alcohol, and we've gone through numerous iterations of how do you create a COVID protocol for what we do. And amazingly, I think we solved and addressed a lot of issues, but one of them is, how do you have someone blow into a breathalyzer multiple times, safely? And it's just like, no, there's no zero risk. There's not even low risk. It's just, how do you do that? So at any rate, we've been totally suspended. And I don't know if this was part of your question, but I'll just give a tidbit and then I can expand later. I've worked with students to take dissertation projects or ideas to be online, so that they can be quote unquote virtual or what have you. We've put pretty much the entire lab on Microsoft Teams so that people can access documents really easily. And there's no more emailing stuff back and forth, like for the work we are able to do. And the final thing, and this is just like a stroke of just luck, one of the projects on our federal grant was lent itself to being executed completely virtually. And so while there were going to be some in-person components, there were always going to be some survey longitudinal components. So we just made the whole thing virtual, and any in-person meeting is now done on Teams and video, kind of like this. And so we have a completely 100% remote study that now, for the grant, that we're able to conduct. So that is human subjects research, right? So but we've been able to put it totally online. But most of what we do is in person, and it's just stopped. And I quit worrying about it like 3 or 4 months ago, because I don't know. There's nothing I can do. So I just kind of don't worry about it and wait till it opens back up and then see what happens.
Okay. Aaron.
So I'm working on a Georgia Department of Transportation funded trend study of the express lanes that they have opened up on 3 different sides of the suburbs. And it's a 4-year trend study. And the way we've been doing this, because the state agency will not allow us to give incentives, and people don't want to do a survey, is to go knock on their door. And it's a very brief survey, but it's face-to-face, a knock on the door. And it's a random sample that we select using post office addresses. So it's not like we know them. We have no way of contacting them except through knocking on their door or sending them something through the mail. So with this no ability to have contact, it has really thrown a monkey wrench into our data collection. I just finished examining the data from 2 of our toll lanes, and our response rate is abysmal because people are not going to do a self-addressed survey mailed to them. We send them a link as well, but they don't want to do it online either. And it's sent to them, so they got to type the link in. So it's just not ideal. We tried those little patches, if you use your phone, the Q codes or whatever. Yeah. No, that doesn't work either. They just don't want to do it. But I mean, it's not just that our response rates are abysmal. It's that it's going to bias the study because it's an environmental justice study, looking to see how do toll lanes impact environmental justice groups. In particular, is there going to be some sort of harm or benefit to more privileged people? So unfortunately, with essential workers being primarily environmental justice group people, you don't know how that's going to impact this study. And it's hard to tell because we did find on one of our lanes that after post-COVID-19, there were a greater percentage of minority respondents who were eligible. But because we're mailing surveys and we're not knocking on the door, people who are ineligible might not be returning that answers one question that says, I'm not driving. So it's like the bias is like threefold and we can't figure it out.
Yeah. Well, I have so many questions running through my head, but I'll save that for later. So, Marianne.
So I think you all know that my work is with very young children with significant communication and developmental disabilities, and it's all face-to-face for any of the interventions that we've done. And so that is totally, there's no way you can virtually, well, there are ways, but not really, not in a standardized way that you could really get them live at all, and virtually it would be very difficult. The other thing we've done, we have a federal grant that's developed an app that's in South Africa, and we were just at the end of that study that was sending us over there to meet, to do a virtual sort of final discussion about what the findings were, and then what how the Ministry of Health might be able to pick it up and integrate it into current treatment strategies that there are. And so NIH, we were already in our second no-cost extension, which meant there were no more. And NIH and we only had money left in the project to do the travel to South Africa. It was sending myself and Rose Sevchuk to South Africa for like 3 weeks in June of last year. And NIH graciously gave us a 3rd year no-cost extension so that we could do it this coming June. Well, that isn't going to happen either. So we have gone to developing a virtual meeting, but we will lose the money. That's another year. And so we're going to be able to adapt it, but not in the way we really thought would be the best. The other part of it was we were going to be meeting with parents who had been in this and were really excited about us having that experience as well as our South African colleagues, but that's not going to happen easily. So we're sort of working on, Dom sort of said a little bit of this, we're really working on our existing databases and from our previous studies and using them to sort of mine the data in ways we had, thought about. Well, if we had time, we could do this. And we're gone back to that. We also have a couple of students. One of them was doing a live focus group study for her thesis with parents. And so that's going virtual and we're doing it online. But it definitely will change. As Erin said, the outcomes, how you compare, this was one to compare findings that we had in South Africa from parents with findings here in the US. And it means that the virtual piece is going to change that. We can't say what we thought we would be able to say. So lots of changes, but I feel in some sense lucky that I have the data to be able to keep working. But also, because we were at the point of submitting another grant, another intervention grant, and we held back till we saw, we'll submit it, but it will be delayed because of, we're not going to submit till we know for sure when we can really see children. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So I want to piggyback just briefly on one thing Marianne mentioned and then dig deeper into the whole results and quality of the research. So Dom and Erin, did you have a similar experience with Marianne where your funding, you were able to get a no cost extension or the equivalent of that? And or what are you seeing happen now that it's looking like things are going to be extended longer? Erin, I don't know if you want to start.
Well, so it's not affected our funding quite yet. We have had to worry. So we did extend our data collection efforts last year. So we were supposed to finish data collection about 6 months earlier from both of our lanes, and we tried to get more responses. And so we were able to get that extension. But going forward, I have a feeling it's not a federal grant, it's a contract, and so it's not doesn't operate quite the same way. Mm-hmm. There's a set dollar amount, and I think as long as we don't go over that budget, they're fine with an extension. They're not fine with us adding money, needing more money.
Mm-hmm. But you could use the money differently if you needed.
Yeah. Okay. And in fact, we have been able to adapt. We've been using student researchers to give them experience. And what's worked out, for the most part, what's really worked out is, as a couple have graduated, we just haven't replaced them. And so the sort of savings there, we're able to afford to extend the data collection process.
Okay, so one tip I'm thinking of for anyone who might be watching this video later is, if you haven't already, digging deep into your funding options at this point. My sense is that a lot of people did the sort of attempt at a 1-year no cost extension thinking, well, we just wait a year and pick up again. Right. And now is the real problem. So Dom, I don't know if you want to speak to this.
You're on mute.
You're mute.
No comment on the mute. In my case, I had, in my federal grants, none of them were at the end of the term. So I was in like the end of budget year 2 with one of my grants. I think in the middle of budget year 1 with another. So I wasn't in that situation where a no cost extension was the right mechanism. So I'm in a situation where I was continuing to pay personnel, but they weren't able to actually collect any data. And that's I actually just filled out, Dan DeCampo sent out a survey or a Google Doc for people. I just was filling that out today. And it's messy because it's not like people weren't working at all. I mean, they were working. They definitely weren't working on what they're funded to be working on for the most part. And then it changed over time. But at any rate, I guess I'm in a situation where, like I said earlier, one of the funded projects, thankfully we were able to put online. So I think we're making progress as we would hope to make progress on that. Another project, which required in-person human subjects contact, we're woefully behind. And I don't know what the solution is other than crying for help at some point in the future to say, okay, I'm at the end of budget year 5. I haven't collected all the data because I lost X number of months due to COVID, and hope that there's ways that the NIH, in this case, who's my funder, will be able to help work with me in some way. There's another project that we haven't even been able to start because of COVID, so we're going to be delayed in starting that project. So that's kind of the messy situation. I'll say one more thing that we did, and it was kind of to serve two aims. In the summer, I submitted in NIH what was called an urgent competitive revision it was COVID related. So they had a lot of different RFAs or what have you. And we essentially got more money to supplement the study we could do online to also study COVID related variables, just to leave it at that. And of course, the extra money was absolutely to do extra work, but I also envisioned it as a way to provide some more money to provide some degrees of freedom, if you will, for what I was losing in paying people, GRAs and staff when we weren't able to collect data. So it just kind of put more money into the overall grant to kind of help us figure out how to accomplish the aims.
Dom,
Yeah.
you should be able to get a no-cost extension, and you could get up to 2 years, at least now, the way they're structured. The first year, you don't have to ask, really, but the second
Right.
year you do. But it raises to me the issue of, like at NIH or even NSF, people doing behavioral work are at an extreme disadvantage compared to people who are doing basic biological, not medical, seeing patients, but medical research, drug research or stuff like that, because we really are stymied overall. And I wonder what NIH is going to do about that, because they're going to have to, when you're putting in a renewal, for example, and you're supposed to write what your progress is, and your progress is limited by COVID, there's got to be some accommodation, I would think.
Yeah.
And I assume they're thinking about this, but who knows?
Yeah.
So-
I don't have, could I jump on that?
Yeah, absolutely, go ahead.
So Marianne, I agree with you, and I don't have any inside information at all.
Yeah.
The only things I know is I remember in late March, the director of NIH put out a video on YouTube. Essentially, like the way I interpreted that video was he was trying to kind of reassure NIH funded researchers that like NIH has got your back.
Right.
We know this is unprecedented. We're going to figure this out, but I don't know the exact answers right now.
Yeah.
So I interpret that to mean like, and I feel like I might have read this somewhere, but don't quote me on it. Maybe it's just kind of I'm reconstructing a memory. That yes, the first year of a no-cost extension, you do very little and you just get it. I was hearing, I think, that the second year of a no-cost extension might start to operate very similarly if you have some COVID justifications.
Okay, well, that would be good.
Don't take that as like, oh, Dom said, and that's the fact. Like, that's in my head. And when I said I would just kind of plead for help, I mean, I think what's going to happen at some point, once we get back going, I'm going to talk to my project officer and say, here's where we were in middle of March, and now we're getting back going, and here's where we're estimated to be when the grant ends. How can NIAAA help me with this? And
So
something like that.
So let me pick up on that, because I'm well aware that I managed to kick this off with all the negative stuff, and I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody listening to this conversation, particularly some of our more junior colleagues. I mean, you three are very well established, senior, experienced researchers with, I'm imagining some data at least you could play with, that kind of thing. What are some strategies that you might recommend to less experienced researchers who are trying to figure out, what do I do? And what I'm hearing to sort of kick it off is one thing I heard you say was go back to databases you already have of information, build on that. Second is talk to your programmer, your project officer, or whoever issued the contract, and that at least there's some possible indication that those folks understand the world you're operating in, particularly around extensions and maybe reallocation of funds. So if there's other stuff in there or details around that, I'd love to hear it.
The only other thing I would say is somebody who is somebody who just got a brand new grant that wasn't like the money didn't flow yet, or the money it's just been given. They just found out they got it. That they should ask for it to be held. I know a colleague in the College of Ed who got IES money. It was just awarded, and it's not starting. And actually, IES was the one who said, we're not sending the money until this is over, because it was work done in the schools. To not start something, the problem with that, not to bring up the negative, but the problem with that is for a junior person who's pre-tenure, not starting that is stopping data collection and moving forward on their work. So using a secondary database or something else might be an option for them.
Yeah, and let me just name for the record, the provost has made possible tenure clock stoppages. Not that that's an ideal situation, but in some cases that might be a response in this situation. So, Erin, any ideas?
As you were talking, I was thinking of my colleagues who do qualitative research, and the research that they do tends to be solo work, and it's very intensive, either ethnography or in-depth interviews. And I'm just thinking, I imagine through WebEx you could do some of that. But what I wonder about is the nuance. Like, how does WebEx sort of change the whole interview process? How much rapport can you build? But I mean, I do think that for some things, if you have that type of contact, that there's research that could still be done qualitatively. It's the problem, say, with what kind of work I do, where you want a representative sample. It's a little more difficult, because how do you reach them, with a phone number to get them to agree and then go on WebEx with you? So I think really people need to be strategic about the types of research questions they're going to try to answer right now, and choose ones that have a method that will work well in the COVID environment. So what I would do right now is change up the research questions I'm trying to answer. So I'm fortunate that I got a lot of data to fall back on from previous studies. But I've also just started a new project using secondary data that I haven't used in years. So, I think there's a negative, but there's also opportunities to try something brand new. And I think that a lot of people don't want to take that risk. And it is a risk if you're not untenured. So, I mean, if there is tenure clock stoppage, that's should help people to make that decision. Do they want to try something new?
Thanks for that phrase, opportunity. At least a little glimmer of hope in there. Yeah, Dom.
Yeah, I had mentioned earlier that we were fortunate to have a study that lent itself to being put online. And so, I don't think this is necessarily a novel idea, but, looking to where can people get good data, still pursue their interests in an online way. And we've actually, that's not just like, create a survey and put it on Qualtrics. It could be, but we actually kind of did some innovative stuff with trying to get laboratory paradigms and put them online. So the student could do a dissertation. So it took some effort. Yeah, there was some risk there, but I think the opportunity to kind of try out that new method was kind of exciting for us to do. The other thing I would say, and my lab hasn't done this again because of the alcohol administration component to our work, but there may be some types of in-person human subjects research that may be able to be carried out in a minimal risk way. We've been talking about research in schools and stuff, and there's clearly those and others that it's just it's a no-go. But when we were trying to brainstorm how to do an alcohol study, again, we hit some roadblocks, but there are a lot of things I think we solved with, using like a WebEx or Teams video, in the lab. So like you bring someone in and you're still socially distanced and they're in a room in a lab and you're in another room somewhere, but you're communicating still virtually and you're able to collect data in the way that you need it collected. So I think depending on the research and the setting that people have available to them, there may be some ways to carry out some portions of the in-person research agendas with some level of acceptable risk. Because there's not a zero risk situation. I mean, we just keep saying that in my lab. Like there's no way to have that.
So that helps sort of set up my next question, which is, as you imagine transitioning whenever and however we're able to do this, I'm curious what you're thinking about, whether it's just sort of a permanent reimagining of the research question itself, whether it's some procedures that just are going to stay changed because it's for whatever reason. Like, what are the things you think about carrying into the long ramp up back into what we hope eventually will be in-person work?
I'll take a first stab. In terms of the infrastructure of the lab and how we communicate and how we store files and whatnot, I think we've taken advantage of the opportunity. Like we have put everything on Microsoft Teams. So and I don't know if people are using that or how many people are using that, but we have different kind of components of the lab all organized in that way. All the files are immediately accessible to people. They're not having to go to different drives and stuff. It's like everything's consolidated in real time. So I think it's made our work and communication really efficient. And I would see no reason to abandon that when we get back into an in-person setting. In terms of research questions, like I don't think our research questions will fundamentally change. I think we'll still pursue the same kind of research agenda. I think in COVID, we've just either not been able to pursue them or we've just found alternative ways to pursue them. So that's kind of been our experience.
So I think in this stage of my career, my main focus really has been giving students research experiences. And, clearly I want to publish from that, but I want them to learn the skills they need to learn. And so that has meant sending out teams of students to collect data, to clean data. And it's really hard for them to do that isolated. We send them out, so with the homeless study, we sent them out in groups for safety reasons. For the transportation study, we send them out in pairs, basically for the same reason. So they get the experience they need, but they're never alone. And so there's safety in so many ways. And so I think one thing that I've never thought about or worried about was cleanliness. I think that's going to be going forward something that is going to be part of our protocols, making sure that everything is sort of sanitized on a regular basis. And it's not just that you have to worry about spreading COVID. There's all sorts of things we could be spreading that I've not thought about, and how to think through kind of that aspect going forward in a way that doesn't harm our ability to collect the research, but keeps everyone safe in a way that I was not thinking about safety in the past. And so I definitely see myself going forward, continuing with the same types of research, because I think it's a very valuable form of research. It's just, I think it needs to be, just a different form of safety needs to be added to my sets of protocols.
Marianne.
So I think that I don't intend to change the questions. and the kind of research I do, but we had already been thinking about this, which is this app stuff we've done in South Africa with caregivers, is to bring it back to the US in a rural environment. And it might not just be a rural environment, but a way for caregivers to interact with their children. And so I think we're going to really push on that, because it will, even though it will take us a while to do that, it will aspects for kids and families going forward, in the sense of having ways to do things that aren't where they have to go someplace to learn how to do it. They can learn in a virtual setting. So I think there's some positive pieces there. And then I think there are some things that we've done that will require going back into a live interaction with families. When Erin was talking about the cleanliness, I sort of forgot about this, but when we were doing our the intervention studies, we had little toddlers, and so you also had kids who had disabilities, so you had kids drooling and all kinds of stuff, and so we had a very big safety cleanliness protocol where we used all kinds of sanitation that to clean all our tests and to clean the rooms and all in between kids that came in. And I never thought about it as being part of this, but it probably is things that were done that we would continue to do, but even ramp them up in terms of the frequency of how we would do it. Anyway, so I think the continuing of the work, one piece of the work that I think will be on hold a while is our South African work once we finish this virtual piece, because of the lockdowns over there and the fact that they are not getting access to vaccine, will slow our ability to start new work there, at least right now. I mean, there doesn't look like there's anything on the horizon. And everybody is looking to Bill Gates to help get vaccine to Africa. And South Africa is the richest of the poor countries. So it's a hard place.
Yeah.
So we will probably do stuff here along the same lines. I would also add with what Erin said about the students, and one of the things that this period of time has done for us, and I only saw this or realized it as I was doing my annual report, was our students, with our help, of course, have, I think we have 6 in-press publications from this period of time, because we just focused them on writing and getting their papers out. And some of them had, 1 round of revision. One of them had 2 rounds of revision, but they have all these acceptances. And so they've been very successful with that. And while I hadn't thought about it in a particularly positive way, in an odd way, because we weren't doing all this other live data collection, we were focusing them on getting the papers out. And so I don't know if that will continue as we ramp back up the other.
As you ramp back up. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So let me ask, and this may be going over ground you've covered at least in part, what are the things that you had built into your research design that proved to be helpful in pivoting, redirecting, reimagining your research that you're glad you did looking back? And or looking back, are there things you wish you'd done that people should think about moving forward? Whoever feels like they can go first.
Well, I have an easy one, but it's not something I'm happy about. We're doing a trend study rather than a panel study for this, and I really advocated for a panel study. And I wrote up the reasons why, the pros and cons of trends versus panel studies. And they said they wanted me to do the trend study, which, because if it were a panel study, we'd have been in contact with these people for 3 or 4 years now. We would know them, we would know how to reach them, we'd be able to interview them over the phone, and we would not have the really low response rates we currently have because we're reaching out to a brand new sample every single year. So that's something that is just not part of my pros and cons that I wrote up. If a pandemic happened, here's the problem with the trend study that I now am aware of. So that will go into the next
That's helpful to know.
pros and cons list.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what you're saying, Aaron, the study that I said lent itself to being put online was what we call an intensive longitudinal design study, where you're assessing people over time, but you assess them every day for like 2 minutes. And we had already had in place the app that people would download to their phone, etc. So the only thing we really had to re-envision was, instead of bringing people into the lab to kind of orient them to the app and do baseline surveys or something, we just put all of that online and then just kind of amped up a bit what our tracking procedures would be. And then essentially what you have is a study that people, for the most part, do on their phones for a couple minutes before lunch every day. And then it's just a big operation of tracking them and kind of handling all that data. So again, we weren't no one was predicting pandemic, but that's not in-person data collection. That's all remote. And so we've been able to do that. So I mean, I'll say that pandemic or not, there's really interesting data, at least in my area, that you can get using those type of designs that I had always planned on trying to use. And I'm really glad we're doing it now, because I think we'll continue doing it into the foreseeable future, even when we wouldn't need to do it.
Marianne.
I think for me, one of the things is we had been sort of thinking about the idea of the app coming back to the US. I'm really glad we have it to be able to do that, because I think I can see the usefulness of that much more. And we have a real head start on being able to do that. Initially, that was not part of our plan per se. How valuable the having that experience for caregivers would be in this environment, but beyond this environment, in terms of making it easier for more people who are living in a range of different settings to be able to do that. The other thing I would say is that having I know you have your data stored and all, but having it stored in a way that everybody can access it. And it was very helpful, because the students could all access what they needed, and I could access it regularly, and Rose could access it, Quan could access it, we could all access the data. That was really, having that organized in the way we had it organized was really, because it lets that database be available for everybody to use. So I would say those things. I will say one thing, that I've been downtown a couple of times, like four or five times now, just to pick up stuff and get out. I haven't been there more than an hour at a time. When I walk into the lab, there's a sadness for me walking in the lab, because it's just so empty. And I see it vibrant, and so many students there working, and it's just a weird, I look forward to that coming back. And that has nothing to do with the data or the studies. It has to do with the environment that in which it all takes place. And I think having talked to the students and everybody, they have the same feeling. Like they really appreciate. I think if anything, you wind up appreciating the value of social interaction, live social interaction, in a way that I think we didn't value it the way or understand its value as we do potentially now.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. For me, the word for 2020 is access on so many levels. The past year has been about different populations, um, access or lack of access to many things, how we access one another, um, and thinking about the work you guys do, just how it heightens how important human interaction is. I mean, it's just not the same to be able to, and I have the privilege of technology. I can reach out and communicate with people. We can store data, all of that. So, well, this has been really helpful. I'll close just sort of with one last question, but take it wherever you want to take it, which is just, do you have any advice for particularly more junior scholars, just sort of really feeling discouraged in this moment, not knowing what to do? Anything that you could give them as sort of either a next best step or things that have been helpful for you to keep moving forward?
Well, I'll start with saying, and I think this relates to access, Catherine, but I think for anybody, but for definitely for anybody who's kind of struggling or isn't sure which direction, at least for me, I think COVID is isolating, and we can do these WebExes and stuff, but one of the here's my point, and then I'll expand on it. I think to the extent that people can force themselves or be able to find ways to reach out to others to talk, to kind of work through ideas or what are my challenges. I think that seems so simple, right? Like a year ago, it'd be like, well, go to the office next door and talk to your colleague about it. But now it's just like it's like flying over the ocean to make it happen. And to expand on this a little bit, one of the first kind of decisions I made in my head when COVID really started was I just was going to do my best to not make any assumptions about what any person or student situation was. And I knew my own situation. Sometimes I wasn't sure what my situation was. I felt so upside down, but I just didn't want to make assumptions about others. And in terms of like, would they be able to, like, I couldn't just say like, let's go have a meeting. Well, maybe something's going on for them, or maybe there's someone who's sick, or they're not feeling well, or maybe their mental health isn't where it needs to be, and there's who knows what. So, excuse me. So I really just tried to practice as much flexibility as possible. And this is all a roundabout way of saying, like, in terms of advice, to do your best to reach out to people, be flexible, and to try to connect however you can. And I found like sometimes we're trying to figure out how to make teams work. And I'm like, can I just call you on the phone? Like, can we do that? And they're like, oh yeah, call me on the phone. Like, cause you get all wrapped up and upside down with stuff and just like, just figure out a way to make that happen. Or maybe you go take a walk 6 feet apart with your dogs. I don't know. Whatever works for you, but try to connect, because to me, that's the thing that makes all of this so much harder.
Yeah, good advice.
I think, Don, I think you're totally right, Dom. I think the connect piece, and I also think persistence in also not thinking that it relates to the connective, that you alone are feeling these things and are having struggles as things are unfolding and it's going on, and that you're able to say that you're struggling at some point and you're looking for alternative ways to get around whatever the struggle is, and looking for interactions and talking to people about it. I agree with you about the phone. I have so many times said, I don't want to be on Zoom. Let's just talk on the phone. Um, and it just different ways of doing that. And also sort of letting yourself admit is not the right word, but letting yourself be okay that you're not maybe doing all that you would have done when we weren't in COVID. And that it was okay that you weren't, you didn't get this manuscript finished or whatever. I will admit I had a real struggle writing, really struggled to write, not to help with the editing of these other papers. I was good on that, but it was me sitting down and writing. I was doing my teaching and all these other things, and I just could not bring myself to it. And I finally did that thing that came from the faculty diversity thing of the 30 minutes a day
Good
for
for you.
14 days. I
Yeah.
did it, and it helped until after it was over, and then I went away from it again. But
So
it
we're
did
doing it
get
again,
me,
Marianne. Just so you know, we've
it,
got one
well,
going. Yep.
it was really helpful to me. And I found it, to get me sort of back into a swing, and also realizing that, okay, I really need to that's what I used to do. I used to start the day that way. And now I would just get up and, get on email or do whatever. And so I found some really helpful things from it, but it took me a long time. I didn't do this until October. And so I was, for a time, beating myself up. I'm not writing enough. I'm not doing what I need to do. And, I think that letting yourself adjust to it and doing different things to try to help yourself, and being persistent. And I think the connecting with other people and talking about how things are going and what you're doing is really, really important, regardless of what your research per se is doing, because all of those things of how you feel about all this affects how you can do your research. Anyway.
Very true. Yeah. Erin.
So one of the things I did was I started doing writing accountability groups with my graduate students, and they think I did it for them, but really I did it for myself. So being accountable to them, and then during some breaks, we wouldn't have accountability meetings. We would just have writing meetings. We'd just turn on WebEx and just start writing. And so that was really forced me, because I was trying to model good behavior for my students, to just sit there and write. So that's one thing I did. But the other thing I did, especially when I'm really sort of feeling out of control, the way COVID made me feel incredibly out of control, was to write about COVID. So I published a piece on COVID and institutional racism with a couple of students last month. And I did it because, well, I mean, I had just finished teaching a graduate seminar on HIV/AIDS, and I was teaching an undergrad class on it. And so it was in my mind how epidemics affect society or highlight sort of the glaring problems of society. And so, it was a kind of a no-brainer to get me to do some writing, and to get me to feel a little bit in control when I did not feel in control at all. So that's kind of my strategy, is to find a way to sort of gain some sense of control over what's happening.
So I appreciate that you all took what could have been a very procedural question and turned it human, because I think there's been a lot of what you've all described, in the sense of isolation, the sense that I'm the only one struggling with this, the sense that I don't have human interaction. Um, I know I really struggle, Marianne, with feeling like I'm not accomplishing what I should be accomplishing each day. And I think there's also a sense from some people that I should be over this already. Like, why can't I get past it by now? Instead of recognizing this takes a long-term toll. So I'm going to put my faculty development hat on as we close this out and mention we do have an ongoing writing accountability group, which is the Writing Power Hour every Wednesday from 3 until 4, which I am overlapping with tomorrow with another session, but we can do that. But in addition to that, we are doing short burst writing accountability challenges in the college as well that will launch sort of probably roughly monthly if people want to dive in and dive out. We're also encouraging folks, feel free to contact certainly me, Dan Diacampo, the Associate Dean for Research, Innovation, and Graduate Studies. And if you have a wonderful, generous senior faculty member, like all of the 3 people here, who can help you sort of get a reality check, sometimes that can help you just chill a little bit as well. So Dr. Marianne Romsky, Dr. Aaron Rule, Dr. Dominic Peratt, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank
Catherine.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.